Hi and welcome back. In this video, I just wanted to go over the quiz you've just done, at least I hope you've tackled it, and guide you through some of the answers, and then also give you the code that I would use to avoid the problems that Ben and Dan had in this quiz. I'm just doing this for this quiz because it's a tricky one, and it's interesting, and it's a problem that you'll see happen over and over again. So let's start the quiz. We've got a quick question to warm us up, first of all, and we get some background. Now, for this quiz, if you haven't done it yet, I'd encourage you to sort of take it seriously, think as though you were one of these two developers, and how you would implement this bit of code. So, Ben and Dan are two novice software developers, and they're trying to build a function that asks a user for a number and calculate its power of 2. And here's the first version of their code. So we've got a function called power of 2, and the first thing it does is it asks the user for a number, multiplies it, powers it by 2, squares it rather, and then returns n squared. So what do we think? Will this work? My immediate thinking for this is, input gives you a string, so this is not going to work because a string to the power of 2 is going to break, so I'm going to say that the program will break in all cases. And that's the correct thinking. Of course, for me, it's a bit easier because I've actually made the quiz, so I sort of know the answers. But I would expect you to be aware of the input function returning a string in all cases at this point. The second question starts getting a little bit trickier. So they've realized their error, and they have a second version where now they are putting the user input into a variable called user input, and then they're turning that into a float. So that's a decimal point number. Then they're going to square that float and return it. And it's pretty common for people to do something like this, even professional software engineers. You've got your input, you're asking the user to enter a number, so of course they're going to enter a number, and you're going to turn that into a Python float, and then you're going to square that, and it's all going to be fine. But users don't always play nice. Sometimes, you'll ask them to enter a number, and they'll by accident, type out the number 10, or maybe they'll type something else by mistake entirely, or they won't understand what you want them to do. So now there are three options. It will work in all cases, and a lot of people will say, yes, it'll work in all cases, because the assumption is the user is going to enter a number, but that assumption is flawed, because the user may not. So it's yes and no. The program will work on some inputs, but break on other inputs. And that's correct. Then we've got version 3, and this code starts getting a little bit trickier. So after shipping their version 2 code, Ben and Dan had some serious complaints. This is a frequent thing. You will get complaints if your code is broken, if you have users using your code, of course. So now it becomes a little bit more contrived. Now we're getting the user input into a variable, and then we're initializing a try except finally block. Inside the try, we're trying to put the user input into a float and inside the variable n. Remember, n is defined inside the try block, so it doesn't exist anywhere else. If that fails with a value error, which means the user entered a string, we print your input was invalid. And finally, at the end, we square n and return that. But of course, n was defined in the try block. It's possible that if that failed with a value error, we don't have n. So n squared will be error because n is not defined. So in this case, they are trying out the code with two different inputs. This is good. You should try out your code with multiple inputs. And in the first case, he's going to enter 4, and in the second case, he's going to enter the string Dan. So for 4, it's going to work because the float of 4 is going to give you something. Then you're going to go and jump down here. But for Dan, you're going to get a value error, which means you're going to try to multiply something that doesn't exist. So you're going to get 16.0 and error as the solution. Now, for this version, we've got something a little bit different. Fairly similar in many regards. We've got the user input as a string, then we try to convert it into a float and put it into the variable n, and then if an error happens, we print out the input was invalid and we say n